you have to start by saying, how did we get here as a culture? Well, why has this become accepted? Where did it come from? And what I try to trace in the book is it's farther back than Roe v. Wade. This goes back into the very heart of fallen man. And it ultimately traces back to Satan himself. Jesus says Satan was a murderer from the beginning. Satan loves to destroy life because he's the antithesis, the great archenemy of God. And so God, who is life, gives life, and Satan loves to destroy it. And so you have to trace it back to its spiritual beginnings and then see how that influence from Satan and his demons begin to influence fallen men and women to find this acceptable when it's clearly unacceptable to God. As you mentioned in the second half of the book, we look at what are the biblical arguments. And when you look at those, they're absolutely devastating. There's no question about where God stands on this issue. And so starting with, how did we get here? How did this become acceptable in the culture at large? Understanding both the spiritual underpinnings of that, but also the cultural underpinnings. How did Satan infiltrate into fallen humanity this view that abortion is actually fully acceptable and we ought to be pro-choice? How did that happen? And then looking at how it unfolds in the political scene, through the courts, looking at how it's become such a massive industry in our country. I think you have to go there first. Then, once you understand what it is, and part of understanding what it is understanding how abortion is actually performed. It's easy to think of it as some sterile medical thing that happens. The reality is it is a gruesome procedure in which real life is destroyed in a violent, bloody way. And I think understanding that and then looking and saying, okay, now that we know what's happening, now that we know the spiritual underpinnings, the cultural and more the underpinnings of society, now let's step back and say, but what does God say? This is what the culture says. What does God say? And then once we conclude this is what the Bible teaches, it brings us naturally to the response, right? Be doers of the word. So don't be just hearers. We've heard the word. Let's be doers. But what does that look like when it comes to this issue?